Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. The brazier crackled in the center of Thoros' tent, casting dancing shadows across the canvas walls. Jon sat across from the Red Priest, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. The words "child of ice and fire, safe in the north," seemed to burn themselves into his vision every time he looked at them. His dragons, now the size of small hounds, sensed his agitation. Balerion, the black one, lifted his head from where he'd been curled near the fire, golden eyes reflecting the flames. Ygritte, named for the girl who died in his arms, stretched her crimson and silver wings, a low rumble emanating from her throat. They'd grown considerably in the months since their hatching, their scales hardening, their fire growing hotter. Jon could feel their restlessness through the bond they shared, a connection that had only grown stronger with time. "You knew," Jon said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "All this time you knew what I was." Thoros of Myr looked older than his years in the firelight, his once jovial face marked by the weight of secrets carried too long. He reached for his wineskin, then seemed to think better of it, letting his hand fall back to his lap. "I suspected," Thoros corrected carefully. "The Lord of Light grants visions, not certainties. I saw glimpses in the flames, a wolf crowned in fire, a boy with a dragon's shadow stretching behind him. But visions can be misleading. They show what might be, not always what is." Jon's anger flared, hot and sudden as dragon fire. "Misleading? You've been guiding my steps for years based on these visions. You led me to Valyria, to the dragon eggs, to..." He gestured helplessly at his dragons. "To all of this." "Yes," Thoros said simply, "because even uncertain visions were more guidance than you had otherwise. You were a bastard boy with no future, no prospects beyond the wall, or a life of servitude. The flames showed me a different path for you. A path built on lies." Jon stood abruptly, causing both dragons to hiss in alarm. Daenerys' eyes began to glow more intensely, wisps of smoke curling from his nostrils. "My father, Ned Stark, he lied to me. My entire life. And you've been manipulating me based on half-glimpsed prophecies." Thoros remained seated, but his own eyes hardened. "Ned Stark protected you the only way he knew how. Do you think Robert Baratheon would have let Rhaegar Targaryen's son live? Do you think the realm would have accepted the child of the prince who kidnapped Lyanna Stark? Your father, and yes, Ned Stark is your father in every way that matters, sacrificed his own honor to keep you safe. By making me a bastard," Jon spat, "by letting me grow up believing I was unwanted, unloved, a stain on the Stark name. By letting you live," Thoros shot back, rising to his feet. The flames in the brazier flared higher, responding to his emotion. "Suspicions are no shield against kings and killers, boy. I couldn't risk telling you what I suspected without proof. One careless word, one moment of doubt, and you could have ended up dead. Or worse, used as a pawn by those who would exploit your bloodline." Jon turned away, his mind reeling. The tent felt too small, too confining. He could hear the sounds of his army beyond the canvas walls, the Black Wolves, as they'd come to be known. Men and women who followed him not because of his birth, but because of what he'd accomplished. Because he'd freed them from chains, given them purpose, shown them a different way to live. "There's something else," he said suddenly, memory stirring. "When I left King's Landing, my father, Ned, he gave me a letter. Sealed. He told me not to open it until I was ready to know who I truly was." Thoros went very still. "You still have this letter?" Jon nodded, then felt a stab of panic. I gave it to you. For safekeeping. When we first reached Braavos, remember? You said it would be safer with you than carried on my person." The Red Priest's eyes widened slightly. "The sealed letter, yes. I remember. I placed it in my chest with my other important documents." He moved quickly to a heavy wooden chest in the corner of the tent, rummaging through scrolls and parchments. "Here," he said finally, producing a letter sealed with gray wax bearing the dire wolf of House Stark. Jon's hands trembled as he took it. The seal was unbroken. The parchment yellowed slightly with age, but still intact. For a moment he hesitated. Once he read this, there would be no going back, no more uncertainty. No more hope that perhaps the documents they'd found were wrong, that perhaps he was still just Jon Snow, bastard of Winterfell. "Read it," Thoros said gently. "You've carried the weight of not knowing long enough." Jon broke the seal with careful fingers. The wax crumbled away, and he unfolded the parchment. Ned Stark's familiar handwriting stared back at him, the letters slightly faded but still clear. "My dear Jon, if you are reading this, then the time has come for you to know the truth I have carried for 15 years. You are not my bastard son, though I have loved you as fiercely as any father loves his child. You are the son of my sister Lyanna and Prince Rhaegar, Targaryen, born in the Tower of Joy as your mother lay dying. I found Lyanna there, guarded by 3 of the finest knights who ever lived, men who died believing they were protecting their prince's son. With her last breath, she made me promise to keep you safe, to raise you as my own. Robert's hatred for all things Targaryen would have seen you dead before your first name day. Even now, as I write this, I fear what would happen if the truth were known. You have the blood of ice and fire in your veins, the honor of the North and the fire of old Valyria. You are the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, though I pray you never have cause to claim it. Power corrupts, Jon, and the throne is built on the bones of good men who sought to do right. I have watched you grow into a man of honor, compassion, and strength. Whatever path you choose, know that you carry the best of both your parents within you. Lyanna's fierce heart and Rhaegar's noble spirit. Use them well. I am sorry for the burden of bastardy I placed upon you. I am sorry for the lies. But I am not sorry for loving you as my son. For you have been the light in my life since the day I brought you home to Winterfell. Your father in all ways that matter, Eddard Stark. Postscriptum, your true name, the one Lyanna whispered as she died, is Aegon Targaryen. But you have always been Jon to me, and Jon you shall remain, if that is your choice. The letters slipped from Jon's numb fingers, floating to the ground like a falling leaf. He stood frozen, the words echoing in his mind. Aegon Targaryen, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, the prince and the she-wolf, whose love had sparked a war that killed thousands. Jon? Thoros' voice seemed to come from very far away. Aegon, Jon whispered. My name is Aegon Targaryen. Both dragons raised their heads at the name, as if recognizing something in it. Bellatrine let out a low, rumbling call that was almost musical. Ygritte spread her wings wider, the firelight catching the silver streaks in her crimson scales. Names have power, Thoros said quietly, but they don't define who you are. You've made yourself into something more than any name could give you. Jon picked up the letter, reading it again more slowly. Each word felt like a weight settling on his shoulders. The rightful heir to the Iron Throne, the son of the prince who had supposedly kidnapped and raped Lyanna Stark, except love. Ned's letter spoke of love, not rape, of Lyanna's choice, not her victimization. The war? Jon said suddenly. Robert's rebellion. It was all built on a lie, wasn't it? Rhaegar didn't kidnap my mother. She went with him willingly. Thoros nodded grimly. Love makes fools of princes and peasants alike. They thought they could run away together, start fresh. They didn't consider the consequences, the war their love would spark, the lives it would cost. And now I'm supposed to what? Claim the throne? Declare myself the rightful king? Jon laughed bitterly. I have 2 dragons, the size of hounds, and an army of freed slaves and sellswords. What am I supposed to do against the might of Westeros? That, Thoros said, is entirely up to you. The flames showed me your potential, not your destiny. You could return to Westeros and press your claim. You could remain in Essos and build an empire here. You could renounce all titles and live as a simple sellsword. The choice is yours, Jon Snow or Aegon Targaryen, if you prefer. Jon was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames of the brazier. In the dancing fire, he could almost see faces. Ned Stark, stern but loving. Lyanna Stark, a woman he'd never known but whose blood ran in his veins. Rhaegar Targaryen, the prince who died at the Trident, believing his son would grow up safe. And Ygritte. Always Ygritte, the girl who died because of his choices, his failure to protect those he loved. You said you saw visions, Jon said finally. What else did you see? What did the flames show you about my future? Thoros hesitated. Visions are not prophecies, Jon. They show possibilities, not certainties. Tell me. The Red Priest sighed, settling back into his chair. I saw you standing before the Iron Throne, but I couldn't tell if you were claiming it or destroying it. I saw dragons, not just yours, but others. Silver and gold, dancing in the sky above King's Landing. I saw a woman with silver hair reaching for your hand, and I saw you turning away from her. Daenerys, Jon murmured. He'd met her only briefly in Pentos, but her image had stayed with him. The last Targaryen, they called her, except she wasn't the last, was she? Not anymore. Perhaps. The visions are never clear about identities. I saw fire and blood. Jon, I saw you standing in the ruins of cities, and I saw you walking away from battles you could have won. I saw you crowned in flame, and I saw you casting crowns into the fire. Jon absorbed this, trying to make sense of it. And what do you think it means? I think, Thoros said carefully, that you have the power to reshape the world. But power without purpose is destruction. The question isn't whether you can claim thrones or conquer kingdoms, it's what you'll do with that power once you have it. I am going to Winterfell to confront my father and ask him why he did this. Past is not something you argue about, and make things good. Jon, said Thoros. No, I have to go there, or else I will not be at peace, and I will go alone. Secretly, and I will be back after living there for a few days. And so he left for Winterfell in disguise, barely hiding his little grown dragons in his cloak. The familiar towers of Winterfell pierced the gray northern sky like ancient spears, their weathered stones holding memories of 1,000 years. Jon pulled his hood lower as he approached the castle walls. Only Thoros knew where he had gone. The Red Priest had tried to dissuade him from this journey, warning that confronting the past rarely brought peace. But Jon had been unable to rest since reading Ned's letter, since learning the truth of his parentage. The documents from the Rhaegar loyalist estate burned in his satchel like accusations, and the weight of his true name, Aegon Targaryen, sat heavy on his shoulders. The secret passage he remembered from childhood was still there, concealed behind a tangle of winter roses near the Godswood. Jon had discovered it years ago during one of his solitary explorations, a remnant from some long-forgotten siege. The tunnel led directly into the crypts beneath Winterfell, emerging near the oldest tombs where the kings of winter slept, in stone. Jon moved through the darkness with practiced stealth, his dragons sensing his tension through their bond. The crypts were exactly as he remembered. Rows of stone kings stretching back into the depths of the castle's foundation, their iron swords rusted with age. But now he saw them differently. These were not truly his ancestors. His blood came from dragons, as much as wolves, from fire as much as ice. He paused before Lyanna Stark's tomb, studying the carved face of the mother he had never known. The stone features were beautiful and sad, capturing something of the wild spirit that had supposedly started a war. Jon had visited this tomb countless times as a child, never knowing he was looking at his mother's resting place. I know who you were now, he whispered to the stone. I know what you chose, and what it cost. The castle above was quiet in the pre-dawn hours, most of its inhabitants still abed. Jon moved through corridors. He knew better than the lines on his palm, avoiding the guards through paths memorized in childhood. His destination was Ned's Solar, where the Lord of Winterfell often worked before the rest of the castle stirred. A thin line of light beneath the door confirmed his quarry was within. Jon paused, his hand on the latch, steeling himself for what was to come. Once he entered, there would be no more comfortable lies, no more pretending that his life had been anything other than an elaborate deception. He pushed open the door without knocking. Ned Stark sat behind his desk, reviewing what appeared to be correspondence from his bannermen. He looked older than Jon remembered, gray threading more heavily through his brown hair, new lines etched around his eyes. The sight stirred old affections, but Jon pushed them down ruthlessly. Ned looked up at the sound of the door, his face shifting from mild annoyance to shock as he recognized his visitor. The quill slipped from his fingers, spattering ink across the parchment. "Fernan?" he breathed, rising slowly from his chair. "What are you doing here? How did you—" "Get past your guards," Jon finished, stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind him. "The same way I used to sneak out as a boy. You never did find all my hiding places." His dragon stirred beneath his cloak, sensing the tension in the room. Jon could feel their restlessness through their bond, their desire to emerge and spread their wings. But this confrontation needed to remain private. away from eyes that might carry tales to dangerous ears. "Jon, you shouldn't be here," Ned said urgently, his voice barely above a whisper. "If anyone discovers you've returned—" "No one knows," Jon cut him off. "Only Thoros is aware of where I've gone, and he won't speak of it. This is between you and me, Lord Stark." The formal address made Ned flinch. His gray eyes took in Jon's appearance. The fine clothes, the confident bearing, the way he held himself like a man accustomed to command. "You look different. Changed." "I am changed," Jon replied coldly. "It's amazing what a man can become when he learns the truth about himself." He reached into his satchel and pulled out the documents, dropping them on Ned's desk with deliberate force. "Do you recognize these? They tell about the lies you've built my entire life upon." He pulled out the sealed letter, the one Ned had given him years ago before his departure from King's Landing. The broken wax seal caught the candlelight like dried blood. "And then there's this, the letter you told me to open when I was ready to know who I truly was." Ned's composure crumbled as he saw the familiar parchment. "You read it?" "Every word," Jon said, his voice like winter steel. "Every beautiful, damning word. Aegon Targaryen, son of Lyanna Stark and Prince Rhaegar, rightful heir to the Iron Throne, hidden away as a bastard to keep him safe from Robert's hatred." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Ned's. "Tell me, Lord Stark, was any of it real? Did you ever truly love me, or was I just another burden to bear?" "How can you ask that?" Ned's voice cracked. "You were my son in every way that mattered. I loved you from the moment I held you in my arms, covered in your mother's blood. Loved me enough to lie to me for 15 years. Jon shot back. "Loved me enough to let me grow up believing I was unwanted, a stain on your precious honor. Do you have any idea what it's like, growing up a bastard? The looks, the whispers, the constant reminder that you don't truly belong anywhere? I know it was difficult." "Difficult?" Jon's voice rose, and his dragons hissed softly beneath his cloak in response to his anger. "It was torture, every feast where I sat below the salt, every time someone reminded me of my place. Every moment I wondered what was so shameful about my birth that you couldn't even tell me my mother's name. And all the while you knew. You knew I wasn't your bastard at all." Ned moved around the desk, his hands outstretched as if to comfort, but Jon stepped back sharply. "I did what I thought was best. Robert would have killed you if he knew who you really were. The realm would never have accepted Rhaegar's son. So you made me a bastard instead," Jon said bitterly. "You chose to stain your honor rather than find another way. There were other options, weren't there? You could have sent me to the wall as an infant, claimed I died in birth, found me a place with loyal bannermen who would have raised me in secret. But no, you chose the path that would cause me the most pain." "That's not true," Ned protested. "I wanted to keep you close, to raise you myself. I wanted to be your father." "Then you should have told me the truth." Jon slammed his fist on the desk, scattering the papers. "You should have trusted me with my own identity. I would have preferred to be Jon Snow, bastard of Winterfell, if that choice had been mine to make. But you took that from me. Now you have made me a Targaryen without my consent, then hid it from me like a shameful secret." "You don't understand the position I was in," Ned said desperately. "Lyanna was dying, and she made me promise. She made you promise to protect me, not to lie to me." Jon's voice echoed off the stone walls. "There's a difference between protection and deception, Lord Stark. You chose deception, and you're a coward for it." The word hung between them like a blade. Ned's face went white, then flushed with anger. "A coward? I sacrificed my honor for you. I let the entire realm believe I had broken my marriage vows, that I had fathered a bastard on some tavern wench. I endured Robert's jokes and Catelyn's coldness and the whispers of my bannermen. How does that make me a coward?" "Because you took the easy path," Jon said coldly. "You chose the solution that required the least courage, the least risk to yourself. Yes, you sacrificed your reputation, but you kept your life, your lordship, your family intact. I was the one who paid the real price. I was the one who grew up believing I was unwanted." "You were never unwanted," Ned said fiercely. "Never. You were the most precious thing in my life." "Then why didn't you act like it?" Jon's voice broke slightly. "Why didn't you defend me to your wife? Why didn't you ensure I received the same love and respect as your true-born children? Even if you had to maintain the bastard fiction, you could have made it clear to your family that I was to be treated as an equal." Ned was quiet for a long moment, his shoulders sagging under the weight of Jon's accusations. Catelyn, she found it difficult. The sight of you reminded her of what she thought was my betrayal. I hoped that in time— You hoped, Jon repeated, while I lived with her coldness, her resentment, her constant reminders that I didn't belong. Do you know what it's like to be a child and have your father's wife look at you like you're something distasteful? To know that your very existence causes pain to someone you're supposed to respect? I tried to protect you from the worst of it. You tried to avoid confrontation, Jon corrected. You tried to keep peace in your household at my expense. Another act of cowardice. The accusation hit home. Ned's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked every one of his years. I failed you, he whispered. I know I failed you, but I was trying to do right by everyone, by you, by Lyanna's memory, by my family, by the realm. There were no good choices, Jon, only necessary ones. Necessary, Jon said, tasting the word like poison. Yes, I've learned about necessary choices since leaving Winterfell. Do you want to know what I've become, Lord Stark? What your lies and your cowardice have created? Something in Jon's tone made Ned look up sharply. What do you mean? Jon pulled his cloak aside, revealing the two dragons by his side. Thin yet the size of a small dog, looking majestic and barely hidden in Jon's cloak. Darien spread his black wings, eyes glowing like molten gold in the candlelight. Ygritte unfurled her crimson and silver wings, letting out a soft trill that seemed to fill the room with music. Ned stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock and fear. Gods preserve us. Those are dragons, Jon confirmed. Real dragons, hatched in fire and blood. They bonded to me because of what I am. Aegon Targaryen, the dragon prince you tried to hide. I have an army now, Lord Stark. Thousands of freed slaves and sellswords who follow me not because of my name but because of what I've accomplished. I've built something in Essos, something you could never have imagined. I've embraced my heritage, Jon said simply. Both sides of it. I've learned that honor is a luxury the dead can afford, but the living must make harder choices. I've killed men who trusted me, burned cities that stood in my way, made alliances with people I despise, all necessary choices, all for the greater good. That's not who you are, Ned said, alarm clear in his voice. Isn't it? Jon's smile was cold as winter. I am what you made me, Lord Stark. A bastard with something to prove, a boy who learned that the world is built on lies and maintained by violence. You taught me that honor matters above all else, then showed me that even you would abandon it when convenient. What did you expect me to become? I expected you to be better than me, Ned said quietly. I expected you to learn from my mistakes, not repeat them. How could I learn from mistakes you never admitted to making? Jon asked. How could I be better when I didn't even know who I really was? They stared at each other across the solar, years of love and resentment hanging between them, like a sword. The dragons sensed the tension, shifting restlessly on Jon's shoulders, small puffs of smoke escaping their nostrils. Finally, Ned spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. What do you want from me, Jon? What can I possibly say or do to make this right? Nothing, Jon said. There's nothing you can say that will give me back my childhood. Nothing you can do that will erase 15 years of lies. I came here for answers, and I have them. Now I know exactly what kind of man raised me. A coward who chose comfort over courage, peace over truth. The words hit Ned like physical blows. He sank into his chair, looking older and more fragile than Jon had ever seen him. I loved you, he said brokenly. Whatever else you believe, know that I loved you. You were the best thing to come out of that war, the one pure good in all the death and destruction. Love without truth is just another kind of lie, Jon replied, and I've had enough lies to last several lifetimes. He turned toward the door, but Ned's voice stopped him. Where will you go now? What will you do? Jon paused without turning around. I'll do what I should have been raised to do. I'll embrace my destiny, both the dragon and the wolf. I'll build something worthy of my true heritage, and I'll do it without the lies that have poisoned my life. And your family here, Robb, Arya, Sansa, are innocent in this, Jon said. They deserve to know the truth, and they deserve to make their own choices about what it means. But you and I, he shook his head, not knowing what to say. Jon left the solar without another word, making his way back through the familiar corridors toward the crypts. But as he walked, the anger that had sustained him began to fade, replaced by a hollow ache in his chest. The confrontation had given him no satisfaction, no sense of justice served. It had only confirmed what he had feared, that the foundation of his entire life had been built on sand. 3 days later, Jon found himself back in the Godswood, sitting beneath the ancient heart tree, where he had spent so many hours as a child. The red leaves rustled overhead, and the carved face seemed to watch him with ancient, knowing eyes. His dragons perched on nearby branches, content to bask in the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. He had not left Winterfell as planned. Something had kept him here, hidden in the ruins of an old watchtower beyond the castle walls, wrestling with emotions he couldn't name. The anger was still there, but it was tempered now by something else. A deep, abiding sadness for what had been lost between him and the man who had raised him. Footsteps on the path made him look up. Ned Stark approached slowly, looking haggard and worn. He had clearly not been sleeping well, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and tormented thoughts. "I thought I might find you here," Ned said quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. "You always came here when you were troubled as a boy." Jon said nothing, but he didn't tell Ned to leave either. The older man took this as permission to sit on a fallen log nearby, his movements careful and deliberate. They sat in silence for a long time, two men separated by years of lies and misunderstanding, yet bound together by love that neither could quite deny. Finally Ned spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the choices I made, the path I chose." He stared at his hands, weathered and scarred from years of sword work. "You were right, I was a coward." Jon looked up, surprised by the admission. "I told myself I was protecting you," Ned continued. "I told myself I was doing what was necessary, what was best for everyone. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. I was afraid of losing you, afraid of the consequences, afraid of making the hard choices that real courage requires." "Ned." "No, let me finish," Ned said firmly. "I should have found another way. I should have been braver, more creative, more willing to take risks for your sake. There were other options, as you said. I could have sent you away, to be raised by loyal friends, could have found a way to give you a true name and a true place in the world. Instead, I chose the path that kept you close to me, regardless of the cost to you." Jon felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. "I understand why you did it," he said quietly. "I understand the impossible position you were in, the promises you had to keep. But that doesn't make it right." "No," Ned agreed. "It doesn't. And it doesn't excuse the other failures. My failure to protect you from Captain's coldness, my failure to ensure you received the love and respect you deserved. I was so focused on keeping the secret that I forgot to consider what the secret was costing you." They sat in silence again, the weight of 15 years of misunderstanding hanging between them. Finally Jon spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, the words coming out rough and uncertain, "for what I said, for calling you a coward. You're not a coward, Ned. You're a man who made impossible choices in an impossible situation. I may not agree with those choices, but I understand them now." "You had every right to be angry," Ned replied. "You had every right to call me exactly what I was. I failed you, Jon. I failed the boy I loved more than my own life." "You didn't fail me entirely," Jon said, looking up at the heart tree. "You taught me about honor, about doing what's right, even when it's difficult. You taught me to protect those who can't protect themselves, to stand up for the innocent and the oppressed. Those lessons, they shaped who I became, even if I've had to apply them in ways you never intended." "The dragons," Ned said quietly. "The army you've built, what you've accomplished in Essos. Tell me about it." Jon was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. He told Ned about the dragon eggs he'd found in Valyria, about their hatching in fire and blood. He spoke of the slaves he'd freed, the sellsword companies he'd united, the small kingdom he was building across the narrow sea. He talked about the difficult choices he'd had to make, the compromises and sacrifices that came with power. Ned listened without judgment, asking occasional questions, but mostly just absorbing the story of what his foster son had become. When Jon finished, they sat in contemplative silence. "You've become something remarkable," Ned said finally. "Something I never could have imagined when I first held you as a babe. But I can see the boy I raised in the man you've become. The compassion, the desire to protect the innocent, the willingness to sacrifice for others. Those are the lessons that truly mattered. Even if I've had to apply them with fire and blood. Jon asked. Even then, Ned confirmed. The world is not the simple place I tried to make it seem when you were young. Sometimes good people have to do terrible things to protect what matters. I understand that now, perhaps better than I did before. Jon looked at his dragons, perched peacefully in the branches above. I still don't know if I can forgive you completely, he said honestly. The wounds are too deep, the years of pain too real, but I don't want to carry this anger anymore. It's poisoning everything I try to build. Forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once, Ned said gently. It's a choice you make every day, sometimes every moment. I don't expect your forgiveness, Jon. I don't deserve it, but I hope that someday you might find it in your heart to remember the love we shared alongside the pain I caused. I could never forget that, Jon said, his voice thick with emotion. Whatever else happened, whatever mistakes were made, you were my father in every way that mattered. You taught me how to be a man, how to lead, how to care for others. That love, it's the foundation everything else is built on. His eyes filled with tears. You were the light of my life, Jon. The son I was most proud of, even if I could never say so publicly. Watching you grow into the man you became, it was the greatest privilege of my life. They embraced then, two men trying to bridge 15 years of misunderstanding with a moment of honest affection. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was a beginning. A recognition that love could exist alongside pain, that family bonds could survive even the deepest betrayals. When they separated, Jon wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I have to go back, he said. My people are waiting for me, and there are decisions that need to be made. But I'm glad we had this conversation. I'm glad we found a way to understand each other. As am I, Ned said. Whatever path you choose, whatever you become, know that you carry my love with you, and know that if you ever need a place to come home to, Winterfell will always welcome you. Even as Aegon Targaryen, Jon asked with a slight smile. Especially as Aegon Targaryen, Ned replied. The realm may need a dragon prince before this is all over, and if it does, I can think of no one better suited to the role than the boy I raised. Jon called his dragons down from the trees, and they settled on his shoulders, or they tried to almost knocking Jon on the ground, which caused both father and son to laugh a little. Take care of yourself, Ned, he said, and take care of the family. They're going to need you in the days to come. What do you mean? Jon's expression grew serious. Change is coming to Westeros. I can feel it in the air, see it in the flames when Thoros reads the fires. The Game of Thrones is about to begin in earnest, and when it does, every family will have to choose where they stand. Make sure the Starks choose wisely. With that cryptic warning, Jon turned and walked away, disappearing into the woods beyond the Godswood. Ned watched him go towards Castle, his heart heavy with love and loss. But he also felt something else. Pride. Whatever Jon had become, whatever he would become, he was still the honorable, compassionate man Ned had tried to raise. The methods might be different, the tools more terrible, but the heart remained the same. And perhaps, in the end, that was enough. The great hall of Winterfell had never felt so heavy with silence. Jon stood before his siblings, the children he had grown up with, played with, learned alongside, and felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon him. His dragons, Balerion and Ygritte, stood by his side peacefully, their usual restlessness subdued by the gravity of the moment. Ned had gathered them here after Jon's decision to reveal the truth. It had been Jon's choice, ultimately. After his reconciliation with Ned in the Godswood, he had realized that his siblings deserved to know who he truly was before he disappeared from their lives again. They had loved him as a brother, bastard or not, and that love deserved honesty in return. Robb sat in the Lord's chair, though he looked uncomfortable in it. At 17, he was nearly a man grown, with auburn hair and blue eyes that marked him clearly as Catelyn's son, but his face held the same steady strength that Jon remembered from their father, and his hands rested calmly on the arms of the chair, despite the earth-shattering revelation he had just heard. Arya, now 13 and still wild as a winter storm, stood beside Jon's chair, her gray eyes blazing with an emotion Jon couldn't quite identify. She had grown taller in the years since he'd left, but she still carried herself like a wolf pup, ready to bite anyone who threatened her pack. Her hand rested protectively on Jon's arm, as if she could anchor him to Winterfell through sheer force of will. Sansa, 15 and beautiful in the way their aunt Lyanna was said to have been, sat rigidly in her chair, her hands folded precisely in her lap. Her auburn hair was perfectly arranged, her dress immaculate, but Jon could see the shock in her blue eyes, the way her composure threatened to crack at any moment. She kept glancing between Jon and their father, as if trying to reconcile everything she thought she knew with this new reality. Brain and Rickon were too young for this conversation, Ned had decided. 7 and 3 respectively. They would learn the truth when they were old enough to understand its implications. For now, they played in the nursery, unaware that their family was being fundamentally redefined in the hall below. So, Robb said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "You're not our bastard brother, you're our cousin, the son of our Aunt Lyanna and Prince Radither Targaryen." He spoke the words slowly, as if testing their weight. The rightful heir to the Iron Throne. "I'm still a bastard," Jon replied quietly. "Rhaegar never married my mother. The circumstances of my birth don't change just because I know who my parents were." "But you're a prince's bastard," Sansa said, her voice barely above a whisper. That's different, isn't it? That means something." Jon looked at her, seeing the confusion in her eyes, the way she was trying to fit this revelation into her understanding of the world. Sansa had always been the most proper of them, the one who believed most deeply in the songs and stories of knights and princes. Learning that her bastard brother was actually the son of a prince must have shattered something fundamental in her worldview. "It means I'm still a bastard," Jon said gently. "Royal blood doesn't change the circumstances of my birth, Sansa. It just makes the truth more dangerous. I don't think you're a bastard. I didn't have any contact with Lyanna after she went away with Rhaegar, but I think they were secretly married. But I don't have a proof for now." "Dangerous," Arya repeated, her voice sharp with anger. "Dangerous because father lied to everyone. Dangerous because he let you grow up thinking you were unwanted." She turned to glare at Ned, who stood silently by the hearth. "How could you do that to him? How could you let him suffer for something that wasn't even true?" Arya, Ned began, but she cut him off with a gesture that was pure wolf. "No, don't you dare try to explain it away. Jon is pack, Jon is family, and you let everyone treat him like he was less than us, like he didn't belong. You let Mother," she stopped abruptly, glancing at Sansa and Robb, but the damage was done. "Let Mother what?" Robb asked quietly, though Jon suspected he already knew. And Arya's jaw set stubbornly. "Let Mother treat him like he was dirt under her feet. Let her make him feel unwelcome in his own home. Let her act like his very existence was an insult to her." The silence that followed was deafening. Jon felt his dragons shift, sensing the tension in the room. Varian let out a soft rumble, almost like a cat's purr, while Ygritte pressed closer to his neck in a gesture of comfort. "She didn't know," Sansa said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. "If she had known the truth, would it have mattered?" Arya demanded. "Would knowing that Jon was Aunt Lyanna's son instead of father's bastard have made her treat him any better? Or would she have hated him even more for being a Targaryen?" It was a question none of them wanted to answer, because they all knew what Catelyn Stark thought of the Dragon Kings and their legacy. She had been raised on stories of the Mad King's cruelties, had lived through Robert's Rebellion and its aftermath. Learning that she had been living with Rhaegar Targaryen's son under her roof would not have improved her treatment of Jon, it would have made it infinitely worse. "It doesn't matter now," Jon said, trying to diffuse the tension. "What's done is done. I didn't come here to relitigate the past or assign blame. I came to tell you the truth, because you deserve to know it." "The truth," Robb repeated, leaning forward in his chair. "The truth is that you are Aegon Targaryen, rightful heir to the Iron Throne. The truth is that you have dragons." His eyes moved to the creatures on Jon's sides, taking in their gleaming scales and intelligent eyes. "Real dragons, like the ones in the stories." "They're not like the ones in the stories," Jon said softly. "They're better. They're real, and they're mine, and they chose me just as I chose them." He reached up to stroke Ygritte's neck, and the dragon leaned into his touch. "They hatched for me because of what I am, because of the blood in my veins. Fire and blood, the Targaryen words. Fire and blood," Arya repeated, but there was no fear in her voice, only fascination. "Can they breathe fire? Can they fly?" Despite everything, Jon found himself smiling at her enthusiasm. "They can breathe fire, yes, though they're still young, and they can fly short distances. though they're not large enough yet to carry a rider. Give them a few more years, and they'll be the size of horses. A few years after that, he shrugged. Well, Ballion the Black Dread was large enough to swallow a mammoth whole, according to the histories. Darien, Sansa said, looking at the Black Dragon with new eyes. You named him after Aegon the Conqueror's dragon. I did. Jon's voice grew serious. Names have power, especially for dragons. They remember their namesakes, carry something of their legacy forward. Balerion here is not the Black Dread reborn, but he carries that memory, that strength. And the other one? Robb asked, nodding toward the crimson and silver dragon. Ygritte, Jon said, and his voice softened with old pain. Named for someone I loved and lost. She reminds me that even dragons can grieve, can remember those who are gone. The mention of love and loss brought another silence, this one tinged with understanding. They all knew that Jon had experienced things in his years away from Winterfell, had lived through battles and betrayals that had shaped him into the man he was now. The boy who had left Winterfell was gone, replaced by someone harder, more complex, more dangerous. What will you do now? Robb asked. Now that we know the truth, what comes next? It was the question Jon had been dreading, because he didn't have a good answer. I don't know, he admitted. I have responsibilities in Essos, people who depend on me. I've built something there. Something important. But I also, he looked around the great hall, taking in the familiar banners, the worn stones, the faces of the people he loved most in the world. I also belong here in a way. This is my home, even if I can never truly claim it. Why can't you claim it? Arya demanded. You're a Stark as much as a Targaryen. Aunt Lyanna was father's sister, which makes you our cousin, which makes you family. Pack, you belong here as much as any of us. It's not that simple, Arya, Jon said gently. I'm also Rhaegar's son, which makes me a threat to Robert's rule. If he ever learned I was alive, then we don't tell him, she said fiercely. We keep the secret, just like father did. We protect you. And what happens when my dragons grow large enough to be seen from miles away? Jon asked. What happens when word spreads that Aegon Targaryen lives, that he has dragons and an army? Secrets have a way of coming out, Arya, especially dangerous ones. Then we'll face that when it comes, Robb said firmly. But until then, you're still our brother. Blood doesn't change that. Names don't change that. You're still the boy who taught me to fight with a sword, who helped me with my letters, who stood up for Arya when she got in trouble for being too wild. Jon felt something tight in his chest loosen at Robb's words. Even knowing what I am, even knowing what I might become. Especially knowing that, Robb replied. You're going to be a king someday. Jon, maybe not of Westeros, maybe not of the Iron Throne, but you'll be a king. And when that day comes, I want to be able to say that I knew you when you were just my brother. Bastard or not. You really mean that, Jon said, and it wasn't a question. I really mean that, Robb confirmed. You're Paka, Jon. Your family. Nothing changes that. Arya nodded fiercely in agreement, her hand tightening on Jon's arm. Pack sticks together. Always. That's what you taught me, remember? When the other children were cruel about my looks, about my wildness. You told me that Pack was all that mattered. Well, you're Pack too, and that means we stick together no matter what. Jon looked at Sansa, who had been quiet throughout this exchange. And you, Sansa, what do you think about all this? Sansa was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisting in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. I don't know what to think, she admitted. All my life I've been taught that bastards are lesser, that they don't matter as much as true-born children. But you were never lesser, Jon. You were always just, you, my brother. She looked up at him, her blue eyes bright with unshed tears. But now you're not a bastard at all. You're the son of a prince, which makes you more highborn than any of us. And you have dragons, and an army, and you're going to be important in ways I can't even imagine. It's a lot to understand. I'm still the same person I was an hour ago, Jon said gently. Learning the truth about my parents doesn't change who I am inside. I'm still the brother who helped you with your needlework, who listened to you practice your songs, who tried to protect you from Arya's wilder schemes. But you're also Aegon Targaryen, Sansa said. You're also the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. You're also a dragon rider, like in the old stories. How can you be both? How can you be my bastard brother and a prince at the same time? It was a fair question, and one Jon had been wrestling with himself. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe I can't be both. Maybe I have to choose between Jon Snow and Aegon Targaryen, between the boy who grew up here and the man I've become in Essos. Then choose Jon Snow. Arya said immediately. Choose to be our brother. Choose to stay here with us. It's not that simple, Jon said, though part of him desperately wanted it to be. I have responsibilities elsewhere, people who depend on me, and even if I wanted to stay, my presence here would put all of you in danger. Robert's hatred for Targaryens is well known. If he ever suspected—
We can protect you, Robb said.
The north is vast, and we have loyal bannermen. We could find you a place to stay, a way to live safely. With dragons? Jon asked, gesturing to the creatures on his sides. Robb, these two are barely grown, and already they're impossible to hide. In a few months, they'll be the size of horses. In a decade, they'll be large enough to ride. How do you hide something like that in the north? You don't, Ned said quietly, speaking for the first time since the conversation began. You prepare for the day when hiding is no longer possible. Everyone turned to look at him, and Jon saw something in his foster father's eyes that he hadn't expected. Not fear, but determination. What do you mean? Jon asked. I mean that change is coming to Westeros whether we want it or not, Ned replied. Robert is not a young man, and he has no legitimate heirs. When he dies, there will be a succession crisis. The realm will tear itself apart fighting over the Iron Throne, and when that happens, the North will have to choose sides. You're talking about treason, Sansa said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm talking about survival, Ned corrected. About protecting our family and our people when the realm falls into chaos, and when that day comes, having a dragon prince in the family might be the only thing that keeps the North safe. Jon stared at him, seeing the calculation behind his foster father's words. You want me to press my claim. When the time comes, you want me to take the Iron Throne. I want you to be ready, Ned said carefully. I want you to be strong enough, experienced enough, wise enough to rule if the realm needs you to. Whether that means taking the Iron Throne or carving out a kingdom of your own, I want you to have that choice. And if I choose not to, Jon asked, if I decide to stay in Essos, to build my kingdom there and leave Westeros to its fate, then that's your choice to make, Ned replied. But it should be an informed choice, made with full knowledge of what you're walking away from. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside, the sound of horses in the courtyard of guards calling out challenges. Ned frowned and moved to the window, peering out at the activity below. What is it? Robb asked, rising from his chair. A rider, Ned said, his voice tight with concern. Flying Baratheon colors. A royal messenger. The implications hit everyone at once. Jon felt his dragons tense on his shoulders, their heads turning toward the door as if they could sense danger approaching. Arya moved closer to him, her hand dropping to the small knife she always carried. Sansa went pale, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. I have to go, Jon said, already moving toward the door. If Robert has sent a messenger— Wait, Robb called out, but Jon was already at the threshold. I can't be found here, Jon said urgently. If word gets back to Robert that I'm in Winterfell—
Jon.
Arya's voice stopped him cold. She had moved to block his path, her gray eyes fierce with determination. Promise me you'll come back. Promise me this isn't goodbye forever. Jon looked at her, at the fierce love in her young face, and felt his heart break a little. I can't promise that, Arya. I wish I could. But then promise me you'll try, she said, her voice cracking slightly. Promise me you'll remember that you have family here, people who love you no matter what name you carry or what crown you might wear. I promise, Jon said, and meant it. He pulled her into a fierce hug, feeling her small arms wrap around him like she could keep him safe through sheer force of will. I promise, I'll remember. He embraced Robb next, feeling the solid strength of his foster brother, the steady loyalty that had always been Robb's greatest gift. Take care of them, he whispered. Take care of the family. Take care of yourself, Robb replied, and remember, you're always welcome here. Always. Sansa was the last, and her embrace was tentative, uncertain. I still don't understand it all, she whispered, but I love you, Jon. Brother or cousin or prince, I love you. I love you too, he replied, kissing her forehead gently. All of you, that will never change, no matter what else happens." And then he was gone, slipping out through a side door as the royal messenger entered the great hall. His dragons clung to his shoulders as he made his way through the castle's corridors, heading for the secret passage that would take him back to the crypts and from there to freedom. But as he walked, Jon felt something he hadn't expected. Not just sadness at leaving, but a strange sense of completion. His siblings knew the truth now, knew who he really was, and they had accepted him. They had chosen to see him as family regardless of his parentage, had offered him a place to belong if he ever needed it. It didn't solve his larger problems, didn't make the dangerous Game of Thrones any less treacherous, but it gave him something he hadn't had before. The knowledge that he had a home to return to, people who would welcome him not because of what he could do for them, but simply because they loved him. That knowledge would sustain him in the dark days ahead, would remind him of what he was fighting for when the world seemed bent on tearing itself apart. He was Jon Snow, bastard of Winterfell. He was Aegon Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone. But most importantly, he was Pack, and Pack endured. Captain's POV. Catelyn Stark stood at her solar window, watching the strange young man with dragons disappear into the woods beyond Winterfell's walls, and felt her world shift beneath her feet. Ned had told her everything after the children learned the truth. How Jon was not his bastard, but his nephew, Lyanna's son by Prince Rhaegar, hidden away to protect him from Robert's wrath. The revelation should have brought relief. Should have vindicated her years of coldness toward the boy she had seen as a symbol of her husband's infidelity. Instead, it brought only a crushing weight of guilt and regret. She had spent 15 years resenting an innocent child, had made his life harder through her coldness and distance, had denied him the maternal love he deserved, all because of a lie meant to protect him. Now he was gone, grown into a man she barely recognized, a prince with dragons and an army who looked at Winterfell with the sad eyes of someone who belonged and yet didn't. She had failed him utterly, had been the cruel stepmother from the songs when she could have been something better. The knowledge that her treatment of him had been based on a misunderstanding made it worse, not better, because it meant her cruelty had been not only wrong but pointless. As she watched him vanish into the distance, Catelyn whispered a prayer to the Seven for forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve, and wondered if she would ever have the chance to make amends for the love she had withheld from a boy who had needed it desperately. The ship Maiden's Revenge cut through the gray waters of the narrow sea like a blade through silk, her black sails billowing in the salt-tinged wind. Jon stood at the bow, his hands gripping the rail as spray misted his face, watching the coastline of Essos grow larger on the horizon. Behind him, the shores of Westeros had long since disappeared into memory and mist. His dragons, Balerion and Ygritte, perched on the rigging above him, their wings spread wide to catch the sea breeze. They had grown considerably in the months since their hatching, now the size of large hounds, their scales gleaming like polished armor in the afternoon sun. Balerion's black hide seemed to absorb the light, while Ygritte's crimson and silver scales caught it and threw it back in brilliant flashes. They were beautiful, terrible, and utterly his. The crew gave them, and him, a wide berth. These were hardened sailors who had seen much in their travels across the narrow sea, but dragons were the stuff of legend, and legends walking among them made even the bravest men nervous. Jon preferred it that way. Distance bred respect, and respect bred obedience. Thoros emerged from below decks, his red robes whipping in the wind as he approached. The priest looked older than when they had first left King's Landing years ago, his hair more gray than red now, lines etched deeper around his eyes, but his gaze remained sharp, and Jon could feel it studying him with the intensity of a man reading flames. "You've been standing here since dawn," Thoros observed, coming to stand beside him at the rail. "The sea holds no answers, lad. Only salt and sorrow." "The sea holds passage," Jon replied without turning. "Away from lies and toward truth. That's answer enough for now." Above them, Ygritte let out a soft trill, as if responding to her namesake being invoked. Jon had named the dragon for the girl who had died in his arms, the first person he had truly loved and the first he had failed to protect. The irony was not lost on him that his dragon bore the name of someone who had feared and mistrusted magic, yet now served as a living embodiment of it. "You're different," Thoros said quietly. "Changed." The boy who left Winterfell was angry and hurt. The man who returns to Essos, he paused, searching for words. "There's ice in your fire now. Steel in your flame." Jon finally turned to look at his mentor, his gray eyes, Stark eyes, he now knew, meeting the priest's brown ones. Good. Ice and steel are what I'll need for what comes next. And what comes next? Build something worthy of what I am, Jon said simply. Both sides of what I am, wolf and dragon, ice and fire, I'll forge them into something the world has never seen. Thoros frowned, concern creasing his weathered features. Be careful, Jon. Fire can warm a hearth, or burn down a city. The choice is always in the wielder's hands. I know exactly what I intend to burn, Jon replied, his voice carrying a cold certainty that made even the Red Priest shiver. The conversation was interrupted by a shout from the crow's nest. Landho, Tyrosh bearing north by northeast. Jon looked toward the horizon where the free city of Tyrosh rose from the sea like a jeweled crown. Its famous towers gleamed in shades of green and gold, their colored glass catching the sunlight and throwing it back in rainbow patterns. It was beautiful in its way, but Jon saw it with different eyes now. He saw the slave markets hidden behind the pretty facades, the corruption that festered beneath the wealth, the cruelty that powered the city's prosperity. We're not stopping there, he told Thoros. Send word to the captain. We sail for Pentos directly. Pentos? Thoros raised an eyebrow. Ilio City, that's dangerous ground for you now, lad. You're not the anonymous boy who left there years ago. You're the wolf of fire, the one they sing songs about in taverns from Bravos to Volantis. Exactly why I need to return, Jon said. I left Pentos as a child running from his past. I'll return as a man who has embraced his destiny. There are debts to collect and accounts to settle. As the ship changed course, Jon made his way to his cabin below decks. The space was cramped but private, furnished with a simple cot, a writing desk, and a chest containing his few possessions. Most prominent among these were the documents he had discovered, letters bearing Prince Rhaegar's seal, speaking of the child of ice and fire, safe in the north. The proof of his parentage that had shattered everything he thought he knew about himself. He pulled out another document, one more precious and painful than the rest. Ned's letter, the one his foster father had given him years ago, with instructions to open it when he was ready to know who he truly was. The parchment was worn from handling, the ink slightly faded, but the words remained as sharp as the day they were written. My dear boy. If you are reading this, then the time has come for you to know the truth. I have hidden from you all your life. You are not my son by blood, though you have been my son in every way that matters. Your mother was my sister Lyanna, and your father was Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. You are their child, born of love in a world that would have seen that love as treason. I named you Jon Snow to protect you from those who would kill you for your father's name. Robert's hatred for the Targaryens runs deep, and he would not spare a child, even an innocent one. I have let the world believe you are my bastard, have let you suffer the shame of that lie, because the alternative was your death. I know this knowledge will bring you pain, and for that I am truly sorry. But know that every choice I made was made from love. Love for you. Love for your mother's memory. Love for the promise I made to protect you. You are the blood of the dragon, and the blood of the wolf. Ice and fire made flesh. What you do with that heritage is your choice to make. You will always be my son, no matter what name you choose to bear. Eddard Stark. Jon folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the chest. The words still stung, but the anger had cooled into something harder and more useful. Understanding, Ned had done what he thought was right, had sacrificed his own honor, to protect a child who wasn't even his blood. It was noble in its way, but it was also the action of a man who believed in simple solutions to complex problems. Jon was no longer that naive. The world was not a place where honor and good intentions were enough. It was a place where power mattered, where strength determined who lived and who died, where the weak were ground beneath the wheels of the strong. He had learned that lesson in blood and fire, had paid for it with Ygritte's life and his own innocence. But he had also learned that power without purpose was mere destruction, that strength without direction was just brutality. He was Aegon Targaryen, rightful heir to the Iron Throne, but he was also Jon Snow, bastard of Winterfell, who had learned to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. He would be both, and in being both he would be something entirely new. A knock at his cabin door interrupted his thoughts. Enter, he called, and one of his men stepped inside. This was Ser Marcus Blackwood, a former knight of the Riverlands who had fled Westeros after killing his lord in a duel over a matter of honor. He was a good man, Jon had found, loyal and competent, with the kind of practical wisdom that came from surviving in a world that cared little for ideals. "My lord," Marcus said, inclining his head respectfully. "The captain says we'll reach Pentos by tomorrow evening. Your orders?" "Send ravens ahead," Jon instructed. "Let it be known that the Wolf of Fire returns to the city where his legend began. I want Ilio to know I'm coming, but I also want him to wonder why. And our men? They're eager to know what comes next." Jon considered this. His core followers numbered nearly 200 now, sellswords, freed slaves, exiles, and outcasts, who had chosen to follow him, not for coin, but for something rarer. Belief. They believed in him, in his vision of a world where strength served justice rather than greed. It was a precious thing, that belief, and not something he would squander lightly. "Tell them we're going home," he said finally. "Tell them we're going to build something that will last." Marcus nodded and withdrew, leaving Jon alone with his thoughts once more. Through the small porthole he could see Tyrosh growing smaller in the distance, its colorful towers fading into the haze. Soon it would be gone entirely. Just another city he had passed without stopping, another place that would know his name only through songs and stories. That night, as the ship sailed through calm seas under a canopy of stars, Jon stood on deck with his dragons. Targaryen and Ygritte had grown restless. As the sun set, their dragon blood stirring with the coming of darkness, they perched on the ship's rail, their eyes glowing like coals in the night, occasionally letting out soft rumbles that seemed to harmonize with the sound of waves against the hull. "You feel it too, don't you?" Jon murmured to them, reaching out to stroke Ilion's neck. The dragon's scales were warm to the touch, heated by the fire within, the pull of destiny, the weight of what we're meant to become. Ygritte turned her head to look at him, her crimson eyes reflecting the starlight. There was intelligence there, ancient and knowing, as if she understood not just his words but the deeper currents of fate that moved around them all. Dragons were more than mere beasts, Jon had learned. They were magic given form, will made manifest, the dreams of gods walking in the world of men. "I named you for her because she was the first to believe in me," he told the dragon softly. "The first to see something in me worth loving. She died because I was too weak to protect her, too naive to see the betrayal coming. I won't make that mistake again." The dragon trilled softly, a sound like distant thunder, and nuzzled against his hand. It was a gesture of comfort, of understanding, and it reminded Jon that he was not truly alone. He had his dragons, he had his loyal followers, and he had a purpose that burned brighter than any flame. Thoros approached from the shadows, his footsteps soft on the deck. "Talking to them again?" "They understand more than most people realize," Jon replied without turning. "Dragons are not pets or tools, they're partners, equals. The Targaryens who forgot that were the ones who fell. And you won't forget? I can't afford to." Jon finally turned to face the priest, his expression serious in the starlight. "Thoros, when we reach Pentos, things are going to change. I'm not the boy you've been protecting and guiding all these years. I'm a man now, with a man's responsibilities and a man's choices to make." "I know," Thoros said quietly. "I've known for some time. The question is, what kind of man will you choose to be?" It was a fair question, one Jon had been wrestling with since learning the truth of his parentage. He had been raised as a Stark, taught to value honor and duty above all else. But he had also learned hard lessons in the brutal world of Westeros, had seen what happened to those who clung too tightly to ideals in a world that rewarded pragmatism. "I'll be the kind of man the world needs," he said finally. "Just, but not soft. Merciful, but not weak. I won't kill innocents, but I won't hesitate to sacrifice a few to save many, if that's what it takes. The world is not a song, Thoros, it's a war, and wars are won by those willing to pay the price for victory." "That's a dangerous path," the priest warned. "I've seen good men walk it and emerge as monsters." "Then you'll have to trust that I won't," Jon replied. "That the wolf in me will keep the dragon from consuming everything in its path." Above them, storm clouds began to gather, blotting out the stars one by one. The wind picked up, causing the ship to rock more violently, and the crew began securing loose ropes and cargo. But Jon remained at the rail, his dragons beside him, watching the approaching storm with calm eyes. "Let it come," he murmured. "I've weathered worse storms than this." The next day dawned gray and overcast. the storm having passed during the night with only moderate rain and wind. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, the walls and towers of Pentos became visible on the horizon. The city looked much as Jon remembered it, wealthy, decadent, built on the backs of slaves and the suffering of the weak. But he was not the same person who had left it years ago. That boy had been running from his past, confused and angry and lost. The man who returned had embraced his heritage, had forged his pain into purpose and his anger into strength. He was Jon Snow and Aegon Targaryen both, and he would make the world remember both names. As the ship entered Pentos harbor, Jon could see crowds gathering on the docks. Word of his return had spread quickly, as he had intended. Merchants and nobles craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the legendary Wolf of Fire, while common folk whispered and pointed at the dragons perched on the ship's rigging. Quite the reception, Marcus observed, joining Jon at the rail. Half the city's turned out to see you. Good, Jon replied. Let them look, let them see what I've become, and let them spread the word. The boy who left Pentos in secret returns as a man who fears no one. The ship docked with practiced efficiency, and Jon's men began disembarking. They moved with the disciplined precision of veteran soldiers, their weapons and armor gleaming in the afternoon sun. These were not mere sellswords fighting for coin. They were believers, crusaders in service to a cause greater than themselves. Jon was the last to leave the ship, his dragons flanking him as he walked down the gangplank. The crowd fell silent as he passed, awed by the sight of the legendary creatures. Baryon and Ygritte seemed to sense the attention, holding their heads high and spreading their wings slightly, displaying their full majesty for all to see. A delegation waited for him at the end of the dock, led by a man Jon recognized immediately despite the years that had passed. Ilio Mopatis had grown even fatter since their last meeting, his silk robes straining to contain his bulk, but his eyes remained as sharp and calculating as ever. Jon Snow, Illyrio said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet harbor. Or should I say, the Wolf of Fire. You have grown since last we met. I have, Jon agreed, stopping a few paces away from the Magister. In more ways than you might imagine. Indeed, your reputation precedes you, young wolf. Tales of your exploits have reached even these distant shores. Dragons hatched from stone, slaves freed from their chains, sellsword companies united under a single banner. Quite impressive for one so young. I've had excellent teachers, Jon replied, his tone neutral but his eyes watchful. Some taught me wisdom, others taught me caution. A few taught me that trust is a luxury the living can rarely afford. Illyrio's smile faltered slightly at the implied threat, but he recovered quickly. Come, you must be tired from your journey. My manse is at your disposal. As always, we have much to discuss. We do indeed, Jon agreed. But first, I have business to attend to. Old debts to settle, old accounts to balance. The boy who left your city was running from his past. The man who returns has embraced it fully. With that cryptic statement, Jon turned and began walking toward the city proper, his men falling into formation around him. The crowds parted before them like water before the prow of a ship, and whispers followed in their wake. The Wolf of Fire had returned to Pentos, and the city would never be the same. As they walked through the familiar streets, Jon felt the weight of his destiny settling around him like a cloak. He was no longer running from who he was or what he was meant to become. He was Jon Snow, bastard of Winterfell, who had learned to fight for the forgotten and the forsaken. He was Aegon Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone, heir to fire and blood. He was the child of ice and fire, and he would reshape the world in his image. Behind him his dragons spread their wings and roared, their voices echoing off the walls of Pentos like a promise of things to come. The Age of Dragons had returned, and with it the Age of Change. The game was about to begin anew, and this time, Jon intended to win. As Jon and his entourage made their way through Pentos's winding streets toward Illyrio's manse, memories of his previous visit flooded back. The tension-filled dinner, where Viserys Targaryen had sneered at him as the beggar wolf with stolen pets, nearly provoking Jon to violence before Thoros' restraining hand had stopped him. He remembered the brief, curious glances exchanged with the silver-haired girl who sat silently beside her volatile brother, and how Illyrio had watched it all with calculating eyes before making his proposition. The Magister had offered his support and resources, but with the expectation that Jon would occasionally serve his interests in return. a proposal Jon had firmly rejected, declaring he served no master and would consider cooperation only if their goals aligned, with the freedom to walk away the moment their visions diverged. Now returning as the Wolf of Fire with dragons at his side and an army at his back, Jon wondered if Ilio still expected the same subservience from the boy who had once needed his charity, or if the fat spider had finally realized that the young wolf had grown into something far more dangerous than a mere sellsword captain seeking patronage. Jon's reunion with Ilio proved to be a brief but pointed affair. The Magister received him in his opulent manse, with the same calculating smile, but Jon could see the wariness in his eyes as Balerion and Ygritte prowled the marble floors, their claws clicking ominously on the polished stone. When Ilio attempted to resurrect his old offer of patronage, couched now in flowery language about mutual benefit and shared prosperity, Jon's response was swift and final. "I told you years ago that I serve no master," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had carved his own kingdom from fire and blood. "That hasn't changed. What has changed is that I no longer need your charity or your schemes." The dragons seemed to sense their master's mood, Ygritte letting out a low rumble that made several of Illyrio's guards shift nervously. The Magister's face flushed, but he was wise enough not to press the matter further. Jon collected a few loyal contacts from the city's underworld, men who remembered his earlier kindnesses and were willing to serve the Wolf of Fire rather than the fat spider of Pentos, and departed the same evening. As his ship pulled away from the harbor under cover of darkness, Jon felt a sense of completion. He had returned not as a supplicant, but as an equal who had outgrown his former benefactor's reach. The boy who had once thought he needed Illyrio's alliance was gone forever, replaced by a man who commanded dragons and inspired loyalty through strength rather than begging for scraps from richer men's tables. The war camp sprawled across the rolling hills outside Norvos, like a great beast of canvas and steel, its banners snapping in the morning wind. Jon Snow stood atop a wooden platform erected at the camp's heart, surveying the organized chaos below. Smoke rose from countless cooking fires. The ring of hammers on anvils echoed from the smithies, and the steady rhythm of marching feet marked where his sergeants drilled the newest recruits. 4,000 men. It had taken him months to gather this force. Sellswords drawn by his reputation, freed slaves who had nowhere else to go, younger sons seeking glory, and outcasts who found purpose under his banner. They were a motley collection, but they were his, bound by loyalty rather than mere coin. Balerion and Ygritte perched on specially constructed posts nearby, their wings folded but ready. The dragons had grown considerably since their hatching, now the size of large destriers, their presence alone worth 100 men in battle. Balerion's black scales seemed to absorb the morning light, while Ygritte's crimson and silver hide gleamed like polished armor. They watched the camp with intelligent eyes, occasionally rumbling low warnings, when strangers approached too close to their master. "My lord," came a familiar voice behind him. Jon turned to see Sir Marcus Blackwood, approaching, his weathered face bearing the serious expression that usually meant important news. Behind him walked 3 other men, Jon's inner circle, those he trusted above all others. There was Tormund Giantsbane, the wildling warrior who had joined Jon's cause after a chance encounter in a Braavosi tavern. The man's red beard was streaked with gray now, but his eyes still held the fierce joy of battle. Beside him stood Jorah Mormont, the exiled knight whose knowledge of Westerosi politics had proven invaluable. The Bear of Bear Island had found redemption in Jon's service, his shame transformed into fierce loyalty. The third man was newer to their company, Daario Naharis, a flamboyant sellsword captain whose entire company had sworn to Jon after witnessing the dragons in battle. "The scouts have returned," Marcus continued, unrolling a map on the wooden table beside them. "Norvos has responded to our negotiations." Jon studied the map, noting the positions Marcus had marked. The free city of Norvos sat astride the Darkwash River, its walls ancient but well-maintained. More importantly, it controlled several vital trade routes between the eastern and western parts of Essos. Taking it would not only provide Jon with a proper base of operations, but would also send a message to the other free cities that the Wolf of Fire was no mere bandit leader. "How many?" Jon asked, his gray eyes focused on the tactical situation. 5,000, perhaps 6, Jorah replied, his gruff voice carrying the authority of experience. "They've called in mercenary companies from Qohor and hired Dothraki outriders. Their commander is Magister Nestoris. He's competent, but conventional in his thinking. Conventional, Tormund snorted, his wild grin splitting his bearded face. That's another word for soon-to-be-dead, eh? Don't underestimate them, Gon warned, though his tone held no rebuke. Numbers matter, and they have the advantage of prepared positions. But, he traced a finger along the map, following the river's course. They also have weaknesses we can exploit. Dario leaned forward, his gold tooth glinting as he smiled. The dragons, you mean? One good pass with dragonfire and their walls become their tomb. No. Jon's voice was firm, cutting through the sellsword's enthusiasm. The dragons are a weapon of last resort. I won't rule through terror alone. That path leads only to rebellion and betrayal. We win this through strategy, through showing these people that following me offers them something better than what they have. The men exchanged glances. This was not the first time Jon had surprised them with his restraint. His unwillingness to simply unleash his dragons upon every obstacle. Some called it weakness. Jon called it wisdom. Dragons were power, but power without purpose was mere destruction. Then what do you propose? Marcus asked. Jon was quiet for a long moment, studying the map and considering their options. Finally, he looked up at his companions, these men who had chosen to follow him, not for gold or glory, but because they believed in something greater. Before we discuss tactics, he said slowly, there's something you all need to know, something that will affect not just this battle, but everything that comes after. The mood around the table shifted, becoming more serious. Jon had called them here, not just as his war council, but as the men he trusted most in the world. What he was about to share would change everything. You all know me as Jon Snow, bastard of Winterfell, he began, his voice steady, despite the weight of what he was revealing. That name has served me well, and I've worn it with pride, but it's not the whole truth. He reached into his leather jerkin and withdrew a folded parchment, the letter Ned Stark had given him years ago, its edges worn from handling. My true father was Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. My mother was Lyanna Stark. I am not Ned Stark's bastard. I am the legitimate son of the Dragon Prince and the Wolf Maid. The silence that followed was deafening. Tormund's grin faded, replaced by wide-eyed surprise. Jorah's face went pale, his hand instinctively moving to his sword hilt. Dario whistled low under his breath, while Marcus simply stared as if seeing Jon for the first time. That makes you... Jorah began, his voice hoarse. Aegon Targaryen. Jon confirmed. Rightful heir to the Iron Throne, if such things matter to you. But that's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you because I trust you, and because the choices we make in the coming days will shape not just our futures, but the future of this entire continent. Tormund was the first to recover, letting out a bark of laughter that seemed to break the tension. Well, that explains the bloody dragons. Here I thought you were just uncommonly lucky. This changes everything, Jorah said, his tactical mind already working through the implications. If word of this spreads... It won't, Jon said firmly. Not yet. I'm not ready to claim my father's name publicly. There's too much work to be done first. Too much to prove. I need to build something worthy of that legacy before I can wear it openly. So we keep this between us, Marcus asked. For now. But I wanted you to know, because you're not just following Jon Snow anymore. You're helping to build something that could reshape the world. The question is, are you still with me? The responses came without hesitation. Aye, Tormund grunted. King or bastard, you're still the man who gave me purpose when I had none. My sword is yours, Jorah said simply, as it has been since Braavos. A Targaryen with dragons, Dario mused, his smile returning. This should be interesting. Count me in. Marcus nodded solemnly. You have my loyalty, my lord, whatever name you choose to bear. Jon felt a weight lift from his shoulders. These men had chosen to follow him when he was nothing but a bastard with dreams of glory. Now they knew the truth, and their loyalty remained unchanged. It was more than he had dared hope for. Good, he said, rolling up the letter and tucking it away. Now, let's discuss how we're going to take Norvos. The planning session that followed was intense and detailed. Jon's approach to warfare had evolved considerably since his early days as a sellsword. He had learned to balance aggression with caution, to consider not just how to win battles, but how to win the peace that followed. The key is the river, he explained, pointing to the darkwash on the map. Narvos depends on trade for its wealth. Cut off their river traffic, and we strangle their economy. But more importantly, it forces them to come out and fight us on ground of our choosing. A siege would take months, Jorah pointed out, and we don't have the supplies for a long campaign. Not a siege, Jon corrected. A demonstration. We take control of the river. Yes, but we also make it clear that we're not here to destroy Norvos. We're here to liberate it. Every slave we free, every merchant we protect from bandits, every act of justice we perform, it all builds toward the same goal, showing the people that life under our rule would be better than what they have now. It was a risky strategy, one that required precise timing and flawless execution. But Jon had learned that the greatest victories were often won not through superior force, but through superior understanding of human nature. The battle, when it came, unfolded exactly as Jon had planned. His forces moved at dawn, splitting into 3 columns that approached Norvos from different directions. The main force, led by Jon himself, took position on the hills overlooking the city, their banners clearly visible to the defenders. Meanwhile, Tormund led a smaller force to secure the river crossing upstream, while Dario's men moved to cut off the southern trade routes. Magister Nestorus, as Jorah had predicted, responded conventionally. He marched his army out of the city to meet what he assumed was Jon's main assault, leaving Norvos lightly defended. It was exactly what Jon had hoped for. The battle itself was fierce, but brief. Jon's men had been drilling for months, their discipline and coordination honed to a razor's edge. Against Nestorus' hastily assembled force of mercenaries and militia, they were devastating. The dragons played their part, not as instruments of mass destruction, but as psychological weapons that broke enemy morale at crucial moments. When Balerion and Shrit swept low over the battlefield, their roars echoing off the hills, entire companies of enemy soldiers threw down their weapons and fled. Those who stood their ground found themselves facing not mindless beasts, but intelligent predators, who struck with surgical precision at enemy commanders and key positions. The turning point came when Jon himself led a cavalry charge against Nestorus' center. Mounted on a black destroyer, his sword gleaming in the morning sun, he cut through the enemy ranks like a force of nature. Behind him, his men followed with the disciplined fury of true believers, their battle cries echoing across the field. For the Wolf of Fire! For freedom! For justice! Nestorus himself fell in the melee, cut down by Jorah Mormont's blade, as he tried to rally his crumbling forces. With their commander dead and their lines broken, the remaining defenders had no choice but to surrender. The aftermath of victory was where Jon truly showed his wisdom. Rather than sacking Norvos as was traditional, he ordered his men to maintain strict discipline. Enemy wounded were tended alongside his own. Prisoners were treated with dignity. Most importantly, he made it clear that anyone who wished to join his cause would be welcome. The response was overwhelming. Nearly 3,000 of Nestorus' soldiers, seeing how Jon treated both his enemies and his followers, chose to swear allegiance to the Wolf of Fire. Combined with his original 4,000 and accounting for battle losses, Jon's army now numbered close to 8,000 men. But the real prize came when he entered Norvos itself. The city's slave markets, which had operated for centuries, were thrown open. 1,500 men, women and children walked free that day, blinking in the sunlight as their chains were struck off. Jon stood in the great square of Norvos, addressing the crowd that had gathered to see their new ruler. His dragons perched on the ancient towers above, their presence a reminder of the power that backed his words. "I am Jon Snow," he declared, his voice carrying clearly across the square. "Some call me the Wolf of Fire, others the Breaker of Chains. I care little for titles. What I care about is justice. What I care about is building something better than what came before." He gestured to the freed slaves, many of whom were weeping with joy. These people are no longer property. They are free to go where they will, to make their own choices about their futures. But to those who wish it, I offer a place in my army, a chance to fight not for coin or conquest, but for the idea that all people deserve to live with dignity. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Of the 1,500 freed slaves, nearly 1,000 chose to join Jon's cause. They were not soldiers yet, but they had something more valuable than training. They had motivation. They had seen what Jon offered, and they were willing to fight for it. Over the following weeks, as Jon consolidated his hold on Norvos, his new recruits were put through intensive training. Marcus and Jorah worked tirelessly to turn former slaves and surrendered enemies into disciplined soldiers. Tormund taught them the wildling way of fighting, Brutal, practical, effective, Dario showed them the sellsword's tricks. How to fight dirty when honor wouldn't keep you alive. But it was Jon himself who taught them the most important lesson. They were not just soldiers, but guardians of an ideal. They were fighting not to conquer, but to liberate. Not to destroy, but to build. By the time the training was complete, Jon's army had swelled to nearly 9,000 men. More importantly, they were unified by something stronger than fear or greed. They were unified by belief. Standing on the walls of Norvos one evening, watching his men drill in the courtyard below, Jon reflected on how far he had come. A year ago, he had been a bastard with dreams and 2 dragon eggs. Now he commanded 2 cities, an army, and the loyalty of thousands. Thoros approached from behind, his red robes rustling in the evening breeze. The priest had been quieter since Jon's revelation about his parentage, but his loyalty remained unwavering. "You've built something remarkable here," Thoros observed, joining Jon at the wall. "But I sense this is only the beginning." "It is," Jon confirmed. "Norvos is just the first step. There are other cities, other chains to break, other wrongs to right. The free cities have grown fat and complacent on the suffering of others. It's time someone reminded them that power comes with responsibility." "And after Essos, what then?" Jon was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes distant. "Then we'll see if Westeros is ready for the return of dragons. But not yet. I'm not ready yet. There's still too much to learn, too much to prove, to myself as much as to the world." Above them, Balerion and Ygritte settled onto their perches for the night, their great wings folding against their sides. They had grown again in the weeks since the battle, now approaching the size of small buildings. Soon they would be large enough to carry riders into battle, to rain fire from the skies as their ancestors had done centuries ago. But Jon had learned that true power came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to know when destruction was necessary and when mercy was stronger. He was Jon Snow, bastard of Winterfell, who had learned to fight for the forgotten and the forsaken. He was Aegon Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone, heir to fire and blood. He was both, and in being both, he was becoming something the world had never seen before. The Game of Thrones was vast and complex, played across continents and generations. But Jon was no longer a piece on someone else's board. He was a player now, with his own pieces, his own strategies, his own vision of how the game should end. And he intended to win. The morning mist clung to the walls of Norvos like a shroud, and Jon Snow felt the weight of it in his bones as he stood in the great hall that had once belonged to Magister Nestoris. The chamber had been transformed into his war room, its marble floors now covered with maps and tactical documents, its ornate walls bearing the banners of his growing army. Balerion and Ygritte rested on specially constructed perches near the great hearth, their massive forms no longer the hatchlings that had once perched on his shoulders. Now the size of large destriers, their presence filled the room with an aura of barely contained power. Jon studied the reports spread before him, his gray eyes moving methodically across intelligence gathered from across the free cities. His network of informants had grown considerably since taking Norvos, but with expansion came new vulnerabilities. Trust, he had learned, was both his greatest strength and his most dangerous weakness. "My lord," came a voice from the doorway. Jon looked up to see Ser Marcus Blackwood approaching, his weathered face bearing an expression that immediately put Jon on alert. Behind him walked 2 of Jon's most trusted scouts, men who had served him since his early days as a sellsword. "What is it, Marcus?" Jon asked, setting down the parchment he had been reading. "We've discovered something troubling," Marcus replied, his voice carefully controlled. "Information about our troop movements, our supply lines, our defensive positions, it's been reaching our enemies." The words hit Jon like a physical blow. He had always known that betrayal was a possibility, but knowing and experiencing were different things entirely. His hand instinctively moved to the pommel of Longclaw, the Valyrian steel blade that had been his constant companion through countless battles. "How do you know?" Jon's voice was deadly quiet, the kind of calm that preceded a storm. One of the scouts, a grizzled man named Willem, stepped forward. "We've been tracking unusual movements among the enemy camps, my lord. They've been repositioning their forces to counter strategies we hadn't even announced yet. At first, we thought it might be coincidence, but the pattern became too clear to ignore," the second scout, Garrett, finished. "Someone close to our inner circle has been feeding information to our enemies." Jon felt a familiar coldness settle over him, the same icy detachment that had carried him through the worst moments of his life. It reminded him of another betrayal, another moment when trust had been shattered by an arrow loosed from the shadows. Ygritte's face flashed before his eyes, not as she had been in life, fierce and wild and beautiful, but as she had looked in death, her red hair spread across the snow, her eyes empty of the fire that had once burned so bright. "Do we know who?" Jon asked, his voice betraying none of the turmoil within. Marcus nodded grimly. "Ser Donal Hay. He joined us after the fall of Norvos. Claimed to be fleeing debts in Westeros. We've been watching him for the past week, and yesterday we intercepted a message he was trying to send to the enemy camp." Jon closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the man in question. Donal Hay had seemed earnest enough when he had sworn his oath, kneeling before Jon in this very hall, and pledging his sword to the cause of liberation. He had fought well in the skirmishes that followed the taking of Norvos, had shown courage in the face of danger. But courage, Jon had learned, was not the same as loyalty. "Bring him to me," Jon commanded. "Now." The next hour passed in tense silence as Jon waited in the great hall, his dragons sensing their master's mood and growing restless on their perches. Valyrian's black eyes fixed on the doorway, while Velu let out low rumbles that seemed to echo the anger building in Jon's chest. When Ser Donal Hay was finally brought before him, flanked by guards and bound in chains, Jon studied the man who had betrayed his trust. Hay was perhaps 30 years old, with the lean build of a knight and the calculating eyes of a survivor. He showed no shame, no remorse, only the cold pragmatism of a man who had been caught in his treachery. "Ser Donal," Jon said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. Word of the traitor's capture had spread quickly, and his men had gathered to witness what would happen next. "You swore an oath to me. You knelt in this very hall and pledged your sword to our cause. Was that oath meaningless to you?" Haig lifted his chin defiantly. "Oaths are words, my lord, words spoken to secure advantage. You're a bastard playing at being a king, leading these fools to their deaths for your own glory. I chose the winning side." The hall erupted in angry shouts from Jon's men, but he raised a hand for silence. When he spoke again, his voice was colder than winter wind. "You speak of the winning side as if this were merely a game," Jon said, stepping closer to the bound knight. "But this isn't about winning or losing, it's about something you clearly cannot understand. Honor, loyalty. The bonds that hold civilized men together." "Pretty words," he sneered. "But they won't save you when the Golden Company comes calling. 20,000 professional soldiers, my lord. How long do you think your rabble of freed slaves and turncoat sellswords will last against them?" Jon felt something cold and final settle in his chest. This man had not only betrayed him, he had betrayed every freed slave who had chosen to take up arms, every soldier who had sworn to fight for something greater than themselves. The betrayal was not just personal, it was an attack on everything Jon was trying to build. "You're right about one thing," Jon said quietly. "Words alone won't save us, but neither will treachery save you." He drew Longclaw in one smooth motion, the Valyrian steel, singing as it cleared its scabbard. The blade seemed to drink in the light from the torches, its edge sharp enough to split a hair. "You have betrayed not just me, but every man and woman in this hall who chose to fight for freedom rather than gold." Jon continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "You have sold information that could have led to the deaths of thousands of innocents. For that, there can be only one punishment." "Wait," Hay said, his defiance finally cracking. "I can be useful to you. I know their plans, their weaknesses. You can die," Jon said simply, and brought Longclaw down in a clean stroke that took Hay's head from his shoulders. The silence that followed was absolute. Jon wiped his blade clean on the dead man's cloak before sheathing it, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he looked up at his assembled men, he saw a mixture of shock, approval, and something else, a deeper understanding of who their leader truly was. "Let this be a lesson to all," Jon said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Loyalty is not optional, it is not negotiable. Those who serve faithfully will find me a generous lord. Those who betray that trust will find me utterly without mercy." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "We are not just an army, we are a brotherhood, bound together by shared purpose and mutual trust. That bond is sacred, and I will kill anyone who threatens it." The men began to disperse, but Jon could see the impact of his words in their faces. Some looked troubled by the swift execution, but most seemed to understand the necessity of it. In a world where betrayal could mean the difference between victory and annihilation, there was no room for half measures. As the hall emptied, Jon's inner circle remained. Marcus, Jorah, Tormund, and Daddario, along with several other trusted commanders. They gathered around the great table, where maps of the surrounding region were spread out, but the mood was somber. "That was necessary," Jorah said quietly, breaking the silence. "But it will have consequences. Some of the newer recruits might see it as excessive." "Better they see it as excessive than see betrayal as acceptable," Jon replied. "We cannot afford to show weakness, not with what's coming." "Speaking of which," Marcus said, unrolling a fresh parchment, "we've received new intelligence from our contacts in the Free Cities. The situation is worse than we thought." Jon leaned forward, studying the document. It was written in the coded script his spies used, but the message was clear enough once decoded. "The Golden Company," he said, his voice grim. "They're being hired." "All of them," Dario confirmed. 20,000 men, my lord. The Free Cities are pooling their resources to bring the full strength of the Golden Company against us. Our sources say it will take about 2 months to gather them all. They're scattered across Essos on various contracts, but once they're assembled, we'll be facing the most professional army in the known world, Tormund finished, his usual grin notably absent. "I've heard stories about the Golden Company. They don't break, they don't run, and they don't show mercy." Jon studied the map, his mind racing through possibilities. 9,000 men against 20,000 was poor odds under any circumstances. But against the Golden Company it was nearly hopeless. He needed to change the equation, and he needed to do it quickly. 2 months, he mused aloud. That gives us time, but not much. We need to increase our numbers significantly, and we need to do it fast. Easier said than done, Marcus pointed out. The other Free Cities are watching us now. They won't be caught off guard like Norvos was, and hiring sellsword companies would take time we don't have, assuming we could even afford them. Then we don't hire them, Jon said, his finger tracing across the map to a region northeast of Norvos. We recruit them by other means. The others followed his gaze to where he was pointing, a vast expanse of grassland marked with the symbols indicating Dothraki territory. The Horse Lords, Jorah said, understanding immediately. But Jon, the Dothraki don't serve anyone. They take what they want and burn the rest. Usually yes, Jon agreed. But these aren't usual times, and I'm not planning to hire them. I'm planning to conquer them. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. What Jon was suggesting was audacious to the point of madness. The Dothraki were feared across Essos for their skill in battle and their refusal to submit to any authority but strength. It could work, Dario said slowly, his tactical mind working through the possibilities. The Dothraki respect strength above all else. If we could defeat them in battle, the survivors might choose to follow us rather than face exile or death. There are 3 major Catrissors in this region, Jon continued, pointing to different areas on the map. According to our intelligence, they number about 5,000 warriors total, plus their families and slaves. If we could bring them under our banner, we'd have an army of 14,000, Tormund calculated. Still outnumbered, but not hopelessly so. The logistics would be challenging, Marcus warned. We'd need to move fast, hit them before they could unite against us, and we'd need to be careful about how we approach it. The Dothraki have their own customs, their own way of seeing the world. Jon nodded, his plan beginning to take shape. We divide our forces, 2 columns, each targeting the nearest Coalesars, simultaneously. Quick strikes, decisive victories. Once we've dealt with the first 2, we regroup and move against the third. And if they unite against us before we can strike? Jorah asked. Then we adapt, Jon replied simply. But I don't think they will. The Dothraki are proud, and pride makes men predictable. They'll each think they can handle us alone, especially since we're not Dothraki ourselves. They'll underestimate us, and that will be their downfall. The discussion that followed was detailed and intense, covering everything from supply lines to battle tactics to the cultural considerations of dealing with conquered Dothraki. Jon's commanders each brought their own expertise to bear, and gradually a comprehensive plan began to emerge. I'll take 4,000 men and hit the eastern Khalasar, Jon decided. Jara, you'll command the western force. 3,000 should be enough, if we strike at dawn when they're least prepared. Tormund, you'll stay here with the remaining 2,000 to hold Norvos and maintain our supply lines. What about the dragons? Dario asked. They could turn the tide of any battle. Jon considered this carefully. Baladion and Widrid were powerful weapons, but they were also symbols of his authority. Using them too freely risked turning him into just another conqueror, ruling through fear rather than respect. Balerion comes with me, he decided. Dapterate stays here with Tormund. The sight of one dragon should be enough to break Dothraki morale without making it seem like I'm relying entirely on them for victory. And after we've conquered the Khalasars, Marcus asked, what then? Jon's eyes moved to another section of the map, where the free city of Qohor was marked. Then we move on the nearest free city. We need to keep expanding, keep building momentum. The longer we wait, the more time our enemies have to prepare. The meeting continued for several more hours, working out the details of what would be one of the most ambitious military campaigns in recent SOC history. By the time they were finished, Jon felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and dread that preceded major battles. So much could go wrong, so many variables were beyond his control, but that had always been true, and he had learned to trust in his ability to adapt when plans inevitably went awry. As his commanders dispersed to begin preparations, Jon remained in the Great Hall, with only his dragons for company. Balerion had moved closer during the meeting, his great head now resting near Jon's chair. The dragon's black eyes held an intelligence that sometimes unnerved Jon. It was as if the creature understood not just his words, but his thoughts and intentions. What do you think, old friend? Jon asked quietly, running his hand along Balerion's neck. The dragon's scales were warm to the touch, heated by the fire that burned within. Are we making the right choice? Balerion rumbled softly, a sound that seemed almost like approval. Across the hall, Ygritte raised her head and let out a similar sound, as if agreeing with her brother. Jon found their presence comforting, in a way that human companionship could never quite match. The dragons didn't judge him, didn't question his decisions or worry about the consequences. They simply accepted him as their master and trusted him to lead them well. The betrayal of Ser Dal Mulhay had shaken Jon more than he cared to admit. It brought back memories of other betrayals, other moments when trust had been rewarded with treachery. Ygritte's death still haunted his dreams, not because she had betrayed him, but because he had failed to save her from those who had. The wilding woman had died because of choices Jon had made, decisions that had put her in harm's way. He could not afford such failures again. The men and women who followed him now depended on his leadership, his judgment, his ability to keep them alive in a world that seemed determined to destroy everything he was trying to build. The weight of that responsibility was almost crushing, but it was also what drove him forward. He had chosen this path, and he would see it through to whatever end awaited. Standing up from his chair, Jon walked to one of the great windows that looked out over Narvos. The city was bustling with activity as his army prepared for the coming campaign. Smiths worked through the night forging weapons and armor, while quartermasters organized supplies for the march ahead. In the distance he could see the training grounds, where former slaves learned to fight alongside seasoned warriors, their determination evident even from this height. These people had chosen to follow him, to trust in his vision of a better world. Some, like Hay, would inevitably prove unworthy of that trust. But most would remain loyal, would fight and die for the cause they had embraced. Jon owed it to them to be worthy of their faith, to lead them to victory, or at least ensure that their sacrifices meant something. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new tests of his resolve. The Dothraki awaited, proud and fierce, and undefeated in their grassland domains. Beyond them lay the free cities, with their wealth and their armies, and their determination to crush this upstart who dared challenge their authority. And beyond that, always in the back of his mind, lay Westeros, the land of his birth, the Iron Throne that was his by right of blood, the destiny he had not yet decided whether to claim. But tonight, Jon Snow stood in his conquered city, surrounded by his dragons and his loyal followers, and felt something he had rarely experienced in his young life. A sense of belonging. He was no longer the bastard of Winterfell, forever on the outside looking in. He was the Wolf of Fire, the breaker of chains, the man who had united freed slaves and sellswords and exiled knights under a single banner. He was building something new, something that had never existed before in the long history of the world. and he would defend it with fire and blood if necessary. The mist had lifted from the walls of Norvos, and dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon. Soon his armies would march, and the next phase of his campaign would begin. Jon Snow had learned many hard lessons about trust and betrayal, about loyalty and leadership, about the price of power and the weight of responsibility. Now it was time to put those lessons to the test against the horse lords of the Dothraki Sea.